Nobody expected what happened when Wings Hauser walked into his Vice Squad audition. The producers needed convincing that a soap opera actor could pull off a psychotic pimp, and that's when Wings decided to show them exactly what he could do. He grabbed one of the executives by the tie, yanked him forward, and screamed in his face with the kind of unhinged fury that made everyone in the room genuinely afraid. The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know, and he got the part on the spot. That single moment captures who Wings Hauser really was. Raw and unpredictable, impossible to ignore, incapable of doing anything halfway. This wasn't method acting for the cameras. Something volatile had been building inside him for years, and he finally found an outlet for it. The director later admitted he had to take Wings out drinking after every single night of shooting just to talk him back down to being a normal human being. Going home to his wife while still carrying that character inside him wasn't an option. For weeks, Wings existed somewhere between himself and the monster he was creating on screen. A 58-year career produced more than 100 film and television credits. Oscar-winning directors hired him. A story he wrote became one of the biggest box office hits of 1983. An Independent Spirit Award nomination followed his work with Norman Mailer, and yet Hollywood never quite figured out what to do with him. Wings once described himself as just another monkey in the tree, but the truth ran much deeper than that casual dismissal. This was a man born into Hollywood royalty who ended up homeless with an infant daughter. A man whose father was destroyed by McCarthyism. A man whose own son discovered his identity by watching television credits scroll across the screen. What created this kind of intensity, and what turned Gerald Dwight Hauser into someone who could terrify executives in an audition room and make directors fear he might never come back from his characters? The answer starts long before he was born, and what happened to his father would quietly decide how Wings' own career would end decades later. Dwight Hauser, his father, worked as a respected screenwriter and producer during Hollywood's golden age. The famous radio drama The Whistler bore his name, and he collaborated with industry legends on project after project. The Hauser family had everything they needed for success. Connections opened doors, stability allowed for planning. A future mapped out in an industry that rewarded legacy seemed guaranteed. Then McCarthyism came for them and took it all away. During the Red Scare of the 1950s, Dwight Hauser found himself blacklisted as a suspected communist. The accuracy of the accusations didn't matter because suspicion alone could end careers in that era. Studios stopped calling and projects dried up overnight. The family that had been comfortable in Hollywood suddenly found themselves exiled from everything they knew. Wings was just 8 years old when they were forced to move outside Los Angeles, and his father started a small theater group in their new location while desperately trying to stay connected to the only world he understood. Wings described those years in blunt terms later on. For 2 years after the blacklisting, he had nothing but his family and his imagination to keep him going. Schoolmates ignored him completely. The stigma of his father's political destruction followed the family everywhere they went. Whatever privilege the Hauser name once carried had been stripped away and wasn't coming back. Dwight never fully recovered from what happened to him. 1969 brought his death at just 57 years old, his career reduced to a fraction of what it should have been. Wings was 21, watching a man who had been broken by an industry that once embraced him. That lesson stayed with him forever. The knowledge that Hollywood could love you one year and forget your name the next. Playing wingback on his high school football team earned Wings his nickname, and his natural athletic ability caught the attention of professional scouts. The Los Angeles Dodgers approached him about signing as a catcher, which meant he had options outside of entertainment. A severe knee injury killed any dreams of going pro, but that didn't mean he had to follow his father into Hollywood. Instead of pursuing acting through his family connections, Wings spent most of his 20s as a folk musician and busker, deliberately avoiding the industry that had destroyed his father. 1970 brought a spot in a band called Vision of Sunshine and an album that went absolutely nowhere. He kept playing and scraping by, still avoiding the path that seemed inevitable given his family history. Then his first marriage fell apart and everything changed. What happened next defined the man Wings Hauser would become for the rest of his life. When he split from singer Jane Boltonhouse in 1973, walking away from his responsibilities wasn't something he considered. He took custody of their infant daughter Bright, who was just 13 months old at the time. A struggling musician with no steady income, no stable housing, and now a baby to raise alone, faced a situation that would have broken most people. Wings loaded everything he owned into whatever he could carry and headed for Hollywood, $30 and a box of diapers. That's what he arrived with, and it's not an exaggeration or a story polished for interviews. That was the reality of his situation. When that $30 ran out, he had nowhere else to go, and for months Wings Hauser lived in a vacant garage in the MacArthur Park area of Los Angeles with his infant daughter. Homeless and a single father, surrounded by other people who had fallen through the cracks of a city that promised dreams and delivered concrete instead. Working as a night watchman became his routine while other homeless people babysat Bright. Every day meant survival. Every night meant wondering if this was as far as he would ever get. The son of a Hollywood screenwriter sleeping in a garage with a baby, because the industry that had taken everything from his father wasn't offering him anything either. 1975 brought an album called Your Love Keeps Me Off the Streets, released under the name Wings Livin' Right. The irony of that title wasn't lost on anyone who knew his actual situation. Commercial failure greeted the album, but it earned him just enough money to move into stable housing with his daughter. That same year, an episode of the television series Canon gave him his SAG card, and the door to acting had finally cracked open. December of 1977 changed everything when Wings landed the role of Greg Foster on the CBS soap opera The Young and the Restless. Steady work arrived for the first time in his life, along with a regular paycheck and the kind of stability that had seemed impossible when he was sleeping in that garage. He stayed on the show for nearly 4 years, and by his own admission, he was dying to get out of it the entire time he was there. Soap operas in the early 1980s functioned as a trap for actors with bigger ambitions. The work was consistent, but respect was in short supply. Hollywood didn't take daytime television seriously, and Wings knew that staying too long meant being typecast forever. Gratitude for the paycheck couldn't change his need for something that would break the mold. He needed something dangerous, something that would make people forget they ever saw him on a soap. Director Gary Sherman had been paying attention to Wings and noticed something that others had missed entirely. When they met on another project, Sherman made an observation that would change the trajectory of Wings Hauser's entire career. The words were direct and unflinching. "You've got a lot of frustrations inside of you, and I think we can do something with that." Vice Squad was taking shape under Sherman's direction, a gritty exploitation thriller about a sadistic pimp terrorizing the streets of Los Angeles. The character of Ramrod needed to be genuinely terrifying in a way that went beyond typical movie villainy. Not movie scary, but actually disturbing. The kind of villain who makes audiences uncomfortable in their seats. Sherman believed Wings had that darkness inside him, waiting to be unleashed if someone gave him permission. Convincing the producers presented a problem because they saw a soap opera actor when they looked at Wings. They saw Greg Foster from The Young and the Restless, not a psychotic pimp. Sherman arranged an audition where Wings would perform in character, and what happened in that room became industry legend. Wings didn't just read lines, he became Ramrod completely, grabbing an executive by the tie and screaming at him with unhinged fury that made everyone in the room genuinely afraid for their safety. Casting him happened immediately after that display. The shooting schedule that followed was brutal in ways that fed directly into his performance. Wings was still under contract with The Young and the Restless, which meant filming the soap during the day and shooting Vice Squad all night long. Sleep barely happened for weeks at a time. He later admitted that exhaustion became part of what made the performance work. Preparation time didn't exist because there was no time. He was so tired he had no social graces left, so he just let go of everything holding him back. Sherman recognized how deep Wings was going into that character and took precautions to protect him. After every night of shooting, the director would take his star out drinking, and the purpose wasn't celebration. The purpose was decompression. Talking him back down to being Wings Hauser again instead of Ramrod. Going home to his wife while still carrying that character inside him was dangerous. That character was too destructive to bring into a normal life. They sat in bars until the monster faded and the man came back. One of the most terrifying villain performances of the 1980s emerged from that process. Ramrod wasn't just evil in conventional movie terms. He was unpredictable in a way that felt genuinely unsafe to watch. Critics compared Wings to Richard Widmark, one of classic Hollywood's greatest screen villains who defined menace for an earlier generation. Vice Squad became a cult classic that people still talk about today. And Wings Hauser proved he was capable of things nobody had imagined when they watched him on daytime television. The film's theme song, a grimy track called Neon Slime, also came from Wings. He wrote and performed it, and the song played over the opening and closing credits. Conventional quality wasn't really part of what made it work. One critic later wrote that Wings pushed the song into territory that felt almost sublime, where every deficiency became a charming facet instead of a flaw. The awkward lyrics and the half-snarled delivery captured the paranoid sleaze of early 1980s Los Angeles better than a polished track ever could have. Vice Squad should have launched a major career in the direction Wings clearly wanted to go. He had proven he could deliver when given the right material and the freedom to commit completely. The logical next step involved bigger budgets and better directors. The slow climb toward legitimate stardom. And for a few years, that trajectory seemed possible. Paramount Pictures released Uncommon Valor in 1983, an action film about Vietnam veterans returning to rescue POWs still held in Laos. Gene Hackman and a young Patrick Swayze starred, and the film became one of the highest-grossing releases of the year, Wings Hauser had written the story that made it all possible. A deeply personal place provided the foundation for the project. Wings had a childhood friend named Gary Dickerson who had served in Vietnam, and watching Dickerson struggle with what he experienced overseas sparked something creative in Wings. He recognized that his friend had left something behind in that war and couldn't move past it, no matter how much time went by. That observation became the foundation for the entire film. 18 months of development went into the screenplay, exploring how veterans might use a rescue mission as an excuse to go back and find their own clarity and their own integrity. Then, John Milius came aboard as producer and everything changed. Another writer rewrote the script, and when the credits rolled, Wings Hauser received only a story by credit. The screenplay acknowledgement went to someone else entirely. Hollywood had played this game before with countless writers, and now Wings found himself on the losing end. The person who originated the idea watched others take credit for executing it. The mid-1980s still brought opportunities that suggested bigger things remained possible. Norman Jewison cast Wings in A Soldier's Story in 1984, an Oscar-nominated drama about racism in the military during World War II. Lieutenant Byrd, a racist white officer, became his role, and he appeared alongside a young Denzel Washington in one of his earliest major film appearances. Best Picture nominations followed the movie into awards season. Wings was working with one of the most respected directors in Hollywood. 2 years later, he appeared in JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, a semi-autobiographical film that Richard Pryor directed and starred in. Tough Guys Don't Dance followed in 1987, a strange and fascinating film written and directed by Norman Mailer that defied easy categorization. Wings delivered a performance that earned him an Independent Spirit Award nomination for Best Supporting Male. Norman Mailer and Norman Jewison and Richard Pryor and Gene Hackman. These weren't B-movie credits filling out a resume. These were legitimate Hollywood productions with legendary names attached to every aspect of the work. Wings was proving he belonged in that company. This was the moment it should have turned into permanence. Instead, it was the last time Hollywood seriously tested him. The simplest explanation might be that Wings Hauser was too much for mainstream Hollywood to handle. His intensity worked brilliantly in certain contexts, but made him difficult to cast in conventional leading man roles. Playing the charming romantic interest or the reliable hero wasn't something he could deliver convincingly. His energy ran too dark, too unpredictable, too genuinely dangerous for comfort. Studios didn't know how to market that kind of presence, so they mostly stopped trying. By the early 1990s, the phone wasn't ringing for studio films anymore. The work hadn't dried up, but the future had. Wings did what survivors do when the path forward closes off. He kept working. Video store shelves across America became his domain by the late 1980s. 9 movies in 15 months, different cities, different crews, same outcome. No upward movement. Bedroom Eyes 2 and Ella Bounty and Living to Die. Coldfire and Street Asylum and Beastmaster 2 Through the Portal of Time. These weren't prestige projects competing for awards, they were the movies that existed to fill out rental inventories, the kind of films that played on late-night cable when nothing else was available. Wings knew exactly who his audience was and never pretended otherwise. He once described them as the microwave burrito guys at 2 a.m. with a beer in their hands. Dismissiveness wasn't part of that description because he was being honest about the ecosystem he occupied. These viewers didn't care about Oscar nominations or critical respect. They wanted entertainment, and Wings delivered it with the same intensity he brought to everything else he did. 4 different characters in 4 different episodes of Murder, She Wrote, spread across 11 years. Recurring roles on China Beach and Roseanne and Beverly Hills 90, 2010. Whenever a production needed someone who could deliver intensity without demanding a major star's salary, Wings Hauser picked up the phone. He never stopped and never slowed down and never pretended he was too good for the work that was actually being offered to him. His professional life maintained that chaotic momentum year after year, but his personal life was falling apart in ways that would haunt him for decades to come. Cass Warner Sperling became his second wife in 1974. She was part of the Warner Brothers family, Hollywood royalty in her own right with a name that opened doors. Their son Cole arrived in March of 1975, and the marriage lasted only 3 years before ending in 1977. Cole was just 2 years old when the divorce happened and he went to live with his mother. Wings largely disappeared from his son's life after that. Years passed without much contact between them. Cole grew up not knowing his father in any meaningful way. Then one day, when Cole was 9 or 10 years old, he was watching television and saw a film with an actor he didn't recognize. He waited for the credits to roll and saw the name Wings Hauser appear on the screen. Something about that name struck him and stayed with him. He went to his mother and asked who the man on the screen was. She looked at him and realized a conversation she had apparently been avoiding couldn't wait any longer. "That's your father," she explained. And that's how Cole Hauser discovered who his dad was. Not through a visit or a phone call or a birthday card. through a credit scroll on a television screen. Acting appealed to Cole as a teenager, and when he decided to pursue it seriously, he moved to Los Angeles and briefly lived with Wings. What he found wasn't the stable home he might have hoped for or imagined. Wings was struggling with addiction issues during that period, according to later interviews where Cole discussed his childhood. The situation became untenable quickly. Cole ended up living alone on a PT boat docked in Marina del Rey. A teenager trying to break into Hollywood, sleeping on a boat because his father wasn't in a position to provide anything more stable than that. Reconciliation eventually happened between father and son years after the damage had been done. Cole became a star on Yellowstone playing the tough ranch hand Rip Wheeler, and Wings was watching every episode by the time the show became a phenomenon. Cole said his father was a huge fan of the show and very proud of what he had accomplished. That reconciliation came after years of absence and damage that could never be fully undone, but at least they had time together before the end came. 2 more marriages followed for Wings after Cass. Nancy Locke became his 3rd wife, and that marriage lasted 20 years before they divorced in 1999. He told People magazine that the marriage had knocked the hell out of him emotionally and financially, and the bitterness came through clearly. In the same interview, he admitted that he tended to distrust women. Whatever warmth existed inside Wings Hauser remained buried under layers of damage from a lifetime of instability and loss. Linda Blair entered his life in the early 1990s. The actress best known for The Exorcist met him on the set of Bedroom Eyes 2 in 1989, and they stayed together for several years. Linda had her own complicated history with Hollywood, her own struggles with typecasting and exploitation that mirrored what Wings had experienced. 2 survivors found each other for a while, then that ended too. His 4th marriage to actress and filmmaker Callie Lily Hauser in 2012 finally seemed to bring him the peace that had eluded him for so long. Together they built a marine life and butterfly sanctuary, which was about as far from the violence of his screen roles as anyone could imagine. They collaborated on independent film projects through their production company and appeared to have found something sustainable. Stability had finally arrived after decades of chaos. The industry hadn't forgotten him entirely during those quieter years. Michael Mann cast Wings in a small but memorable role in The Insider in 1999, an Oscar-nominated drama with Al Pacino and Russell Crowe carrying the main storyline. Wings played a tobacco company lawyer, and despite having only one scene, he made an impression that critics still reference when discussing the film. Sight and Sound praised his spectacular lantern jaw and called him vastly underrated, which was a description that had followed him for decades. The scene where Bruce McGill's character tells Wings to wipe that smirk off your face became one of the film's most memorable moments. Even in a room with Pacino and Crowe commanding attention, Wings Hauser found a way to steal focus. Guest spots continued into the 2000s on Criminal Minds and House and Monk and CSY and Castle and Rizzoli and Isles. 2010 brought him back to The Young and the Restless nearly 30 years after leaving the show, reprising his role as Greg Foster for 3 episodes. The soap that had given him his first real stability welcomed him back like a returning veteran who had earned his place. False rumors of his death spread across social media in 2020, and his wife had to publicly clarify that Wings was alive and doing well. That strange moment echoed how the industry had always treated him. Forgotten enough that people assumed he was gone, but still present, still working, still refusing to disappear when it would have been easier to fade away. March 15th, 2025 brought the real end. Wings Hauser died at his home in Santa Monica after a long battle with COPD that had been stealing his breath for years. Oxygen tanks had become his constant companions, his lungs failing after decades of hard living. 77 years had passed since his birth in Hollywood. Bright, his daughter, confirmed his passing to the press. She was the baby he had carried into that vacant garage 50 years earlier, and now she was speaking to reporters about her father's death. Cole survived him as well, now one of television's most recognizable stars thanks to Yellowstone. Their reconciliation, imperfect as it remained, had at least given them time together before the end came. A documentary called Wings Hauser, Working Class Actor, had been in development for years, an attempt to chronicle a career that defied easy categorization. The title captured something essential about who he was at his core. Not a movie star in the traditional sense of your red carpets and magazine covers. Not a character actor content to fade into the background and collect paychecks. A working class actor who showed up, delivered everything he had, and moved on to the next job, because that's what survivors do when the alternative is giving up. Entertainment Weekly's reporter seemed genuinely confused in 1991 about why she had been sent to interview this man who existed somewhere between fame and obscurity. Wings shared her confusion openly. "They sent you 3,000 miles to interview me," he asked her. "I'm just another monkey in the tree." Another monkey wasn't what he was, no matter how casually he dismissed himself. He was the son of a blacklisted writer who had watched his family's legacy get destroyed by political persecution. He was a homeless single father who had clawed his way into an industry that owed him nothing and offered him less. He was the actor who had to be talked down from his characters because he went so deep that coming back wasn't guaranteed. He was the man whose own son learned his identity from television credits. He was the writer who created a hit movie and watched someone else take the credit. He was the villain who terrified audiences and the survivor who kept working when the spotlight moved elsewhere. The same intensity that made him grab an executive by the tie in that Vice Squad audition, the same darkness that directors had to drink out of him after every night of shooting, that was what kept him locked out of the A-list forever. Hollywood wanted that energy on screen but didn't know what to do with the man who carried it. Wings Hauser lived a life that contained more drama than most of the films he appeared in over those 58 years. The talent was undeniable to anyone who watched him work. The chaos was constant and often self-inflicted. And Hollywood, for all its ability to manufacture stories and sell them to the world, never quite figured out how to tell his.